will say good day to you this day of your time. How are you all? All right. We thank you first and foremost for co-creating this interaction with us this day of your time, for allowing us to transmit this information to each and every one of you individually and all of you together collectively. We thank you for your co-creation and the gift that you are giving to our civilization in allowing us to experience each and every one of you. Let us begin this part of the transmission, this continuation of the idea of the 9 levels of consciousness, by saying that we would like to clarify our clarification. As many of you now recognize by the diagrams that you hold in your hands, there is a little bit of a different order to the things than we initially discussed in the initial pre-recorded transmission. Allow us to explain this difference. The idea that we were discussing was primarily how the physical mind perceives the idea of the individual automatic mind and the collective automatic mind, with a continuation of the recognition that as the physical mind tends in your reality to think of thoughts as highest, of emotions as secondary, of beliefs as lower, it also continues that idea and assumes that the individual automatic mind and the collective automatic mind are lower still. So from the physical mind's typical point of view, as has existed on your planet for quite some time, it considers the individual automatic mind and the collective automatic mind to be the lowest levels, the 8th level and the 9th level. So the description of that as the 8th and 9th levels are from the perspective of the physical mind, as it tends to think of these things, including the beliefs and emotions, as being under, as being lower than the idea of the conscious mind. Look at the very definition you subscribe in that sense, or label the idea of the subconscious, sub meaning under. So in the idea we were expressing initially, we were simply describing more often than not how the physical mind actually sees these things, and thus how the physical mind experiences these things. Because as the physical mind labels such things as being lower, underneath, sub, shall we say, to the conscious mind, it thus then does create a shadow version of these things, a shadow reflection of these things in physical reality to reinforce its belief. Because all belief systems are self-perpetuating and are designed, are constructed to make it seem as if there is no other belief possible. So when the physical mind does lock on to a belief or an idea that the thought pattern, that the conscious mind is the highest level and that feelings in the subconscious are lower and that beliefs in the unconscious are lower still, it will continue to assume that it must also go lower still to investigate or explore the idea of the individual connection to automatic mind, what you would call the themes that you chose to explore as an individual, and it assumes it must go lower still to discover what the collective agreements are. And thus then that is the experience that the physical mind has. But as you can see from the diagram in your hand, that is not actually the positions that these things occupy in their relation to one another when they are created. As we said, these things are created from the top down. So if you allow yourself some degree of perception with this, you will see that in reality, so to speak, going from the oversoul level down to the individual soul, and as we have indicated on the diagram, also synonymous to some degree with the word individual spirit, and we will explain the difference in a moment, thus continuing down into the creation of the reality and the world that harbors the higher mind, and thus going down in vibration to create the template level reality The next level that is actually created is the collective level, because you must lay out the foundation of the game. You must lay out the game board before you can create the piece that plays on that board, to use what you would call perhaps a chess analogy. So the idea is that you must create the playing field first, and that is the level of collective agreements. Then you can start to describe what your individual agreement is within that collective, what your individual theme of exploration is on that game board, on that foundational framework that is represented by the collective level. Then, once you have identified that theme, once you have described that, once you have fashioned that on an individual basis, thus then do you continue downward to crystallize that idea of individuality into the threefold concept, the threefold prism of the personality, of the physical mind, starting again at the highest level with the beliefs, and thus then going down through the feeling level, the intuitive level, the intuition levels, and finally thus then to the lowest level that is actually created, the lowest vibrational frequency that is actually crystallized, which is the level you call thoughts. And thus then, as you can see on the physical diagram, the idea of the higher belief system, the middle emotional level, and the lower level of thoughts combine to form the physical personality that you can also refer to as the ego structure. Another name in that sense for the personality, not meaning positive or negative in either context, just the basic fundamental neutral ego structure whose job it is to keep you focused in the physical reality game. Thus then, by the behaviors exhibited by the personality, by the ego structure, does it thus then reflectively reveal what the thought patterns are that stem from the feeling level, that stem from the belief level, and back up to the individual automatic mind, the collective automatic mind, going into the template level that thus then connects to the higher mind and into the individual soul and spirit level and up to the oversoul level. Does this make sense? All right. Now, we can discuss this further when we get into the idea of questions and answers, but for now, understand that this diagram is representative of how the levels are created from the top down, how they are actually physically crystallized, and their actual construction relationship to each other, while at the same time, from what your physical point of view has assumed, it would seem to be just the opposite. That thoughts are on the top, feelings are underneath that, beliefs are lower still, the individual automatic mind lower still, and the collective automatic mind the lowest of all. But that's the shadow reflection of the true construct which you now have in your hands, which represents the construction from the top down. Now, let us explain a little bit more about the idea of why the individual soul level also says spirit. They are almost the same thing, but not quite. Let us define it in this way. When the oversoul, as we say, splits itself, divides itself, vibrates itself into discrete souls, if you wish to use that term, it's up to you, doesn't matter. It creates an energy essence that is individualized to a certain extent, but doesn't really in any way represent the specific personality that it will become by lowering itself still into physical reality. It is like the idea of unfashioned clay. In that sense, it is relatively featureless. It has the true essence of the total being, but it doesn't really have the mark or the stamp of the idea called personality or individuality as a person. But after the soul allows itself to create the higher mind, the template level reality, and the personality structure of beliefs, emotions, and thoughts, in that sense, going down through after having done the idea of the collective automatic and the individual automatic, after it experiences physical reality, that soul, in a sense, is stamped with an impression of the personality, of the discrete and unique and distinct personality that that soul experienced itself to be in its theme of exploration. Thus then, when that personality dies, when it goes back up into the higher levels and goes back to the individual soul level, it arrives back on that level as the individual spirit. The spirit being representative of the person you would recognize of having lived the life. So the idea is that then when people contact spirits of the dead, they are contacting the individual soul level. But the individual soul that is no longer simply the raw clay, but that which has been fired into the specific personality stamped with the specific personality recognizable as the specific personality experience that it had in physical reality, and that's the difference between those two terms. So the individual soul level and the individual spirit level are the same as a level, but vibrationally one starts out very raw and the other starts out very, in that sense, ends up very specifically taking with it all the experience it absorbed from the physical reality journey, from the physical reality experience. Does that make sense? All right. Thus then that physical personality, having that experience, imprinting the soul with its spirit, thus then going back to that level, thus then the Oversoul can thus then gain knowledge, gain experience from that spirit that has now been fashioned out of the raw clay of the individual soul that was broken off from the Oversoul level. Does that make sense? So thus then you see this coming and going. Again, this is all somewhat euphemistic, since all of this in a sense is still taking place within the collective consciousness, within the consciousness, the greater consciousness that you are. It is all taking place within that. So this nomenclature of coming down and going up and all that are simply conveniences of translation in your language. Because as we have said many times, even the experience you call physical reality is just an experience. The experience is real, but physical reality does not really have any solidity unto itself apart from what your consciousness creates itself to experience. It is simply a reflection. As all levels are that are less than the one, it is simply a reflection of another aspect, another perspective, another point of view of the consciousness of all that is expressing itself in the unique way, the unique frequency, the unique window, the unique doorway, the unique vibration that you are created to be as an individual split off from the total source of all that is and the one. Does that make sense? Are you sure? All right. So, allow yourselves thus then to take these diagrams and allow yourselves to ponder and let it sink in, as we said, so that it becomes not second nature but first nature to you. So that automatically when you begin to explore the idea, when you begin to know that it is important to get in touch with the beliefs, you will allow yourself to raise the frequency and not lower the frequency to do so. And in allowing yourself to do that, as we said, you'll become much more adept at receiving communication from the higher levels, because in a sense, from the physical reality level, from the thought pattern level, there really is only up. Even though you can create the shadow experience and make it seem as if you're going down to another place when you lower your vibration. In that sense, all you're doing is creating that repetitive cycle that simply keeps you focused in the limited physical reality perspective, the limited ego reality, and by doing it that way, by lowering your vibration to look for answers, by thinking you have to go down in consciousness to find out what you need to find out, you simply reinforce the idea of that physical ego structure, and you put so much burden on it that it starts to resist and starts to, in a sense, resent all of the responsibility you are heaping on it for doing the job of things that should be being done on higher levels, and that's what makes it kick over and snap into what you call the negative ego. So thus then, the idea of going down in vibration to look for answers actually generates the concept you call the negative ego, the resistant ego, the idea of that which knows it is being put upon far more than it was designed to handle, and in a sense, fights back. So the idea thus then is it becomes caught up in all of these ideas. It cannot find a way out because all you're feeding it are belief systems that say you have to go down, you have to go down, you have to go down. And as you find there is really nowhere to go because that's just a shadow perspective of those lower levels that aren't really down there, you allow the ego to become more and more frustrated. You allow that feedback mechanism to amplify itself, magnify itself, compound on itself, because it keeps telling you there's nothing down there. I can't go. You keep saying, you go down there and you find out. You find out what I need to know. There's nothing down. You go down there. And finally, it will rebel. It will fight. It will become so frustrated by the orders it is being given that it will cease to function in its proper way. It will start to break down. It will become, in that sense, incapable of the communication that it was designed to communicate to keep you focused in physical reality in a lighter way. And you will find thus then that the only way that you can repair that is to really truly thus then go up and find a way to let the ego know from the higher levels that it is loved, that it is cherished, that it is valued, that you can negotiate with it from a higher point of view, let it know it is part and parcel of the total being, and that the annihilation that it fears through change will not happen, that it will go with you, but that it will only be allowed to do its job, the job it was designed to do, was to simply keep you focused in the physical reality experience, because that's all the ego really is designed to do. It is not designed in any way, shape, or form, as we have said before, to conceive of things. That's the purview of the higher mind. It is only designed to experience what's happening. And if you give it the task of trying to figure out how things are happening and what's happening and seek those things out, find out where they are and what's going on down there in those subconscious levels, you will only push it to a place that doesn't really exist. And anytime you push against the wall, when there is really nothing beyond that wall, you add more energy for that thing that you're pushing against to spring back in your face in such a strong way that it will knock you over. It will, as you say, knock you for a loop. So, ease up on the physical personality. Do not demand of it that it do a job it is not designed to do. Always allow yourself to know that you are inviting the ego to go along with you up the ladder and up in vibration on this exciting journey of self-discovery of what you have created, your unique aspect of creation to be. And when you begin to truly do that in an automatic way, every day, every time, in every situation, and every circumstance, always going up to find out what the beliefs are, then you will find that more and more information will be trickling down from the higher mind through the conduit of imagination, through the idea of the template level, through the idea of the collective automatic, through the idea of the individual automatic, and into those levels that construct the personality and into the beliefs and make them so much easier to shift and so much easier to change and so much easier to define in ways that are in alignment with who you prefer to be. Does that make sense? Again, you can look at this in some way, shape, or form as the idea of the creation of a game of chess where you have to lay out the board and then you have to define the concept of what particular piece you will be playing the part of. And thus then, when you create the chess piece, let us say, just for example, in that sense, it is what you call the knight, you allow yourself thus then with the belief to define what material you'll be making out of. That's the foundation. And with the emotions, you'll be defining exactly what the texture of that material shall be, smooth, rough. And with the idea of the thoughts, you'll be defining exactly what shape that chess piece should be. It should look like this. And thus then, once you have done that, it will have the ability to take the actions. In other words, it will have the behavior that it needs to have in the game. It will move in the squares according to how it has been defined, according to the theme you wish to explore, and it will interact with all the other pieces in the appropriate manner for which it was designed. So it really is as simple as understanding it in that way, if that helps by analogy. Do you understand? All right then. Thank you. And please understand that it is not necessarily meant in any negative way, should you find yourself using this chess analogy, to think of yourself as a pawn. It is just a term. Pawns are very important in the game of chess and can, in the right circumstances, checkmate the king. So allow yourself to understand that you can equalize the board in terms of the idea of what each of those pieces does, because each of you is a unique piece, and cherish the abilities and the material and the textures and the shapes out of which you have fashioned the idea of your particular game piece. Knowing that when you are fully aligned with how the board has been laid out and what the concept of your piece is and the material from which you've created it and the texture that you've given it and the shape that you've given it, that it will have the correct behavior. It will automatically move as it needs to move on the game board. It will interact with all the other pieces as it needs to interact in perfect harmony and synchronicity going through that particular game. And you will allow yourself to have a very enjoyable game that will be a very profound learning experience. And thus then creating the idea, fashioning the idea, imprinting the idea of the spirit upon the individual soul that the Oversoul can thus then relate to and experience from and grow from and expand from, and thus be more capable and even more capable of splitting off into more souls to become spirits. In that sense, having journeyed through the experience of physical reality in the way we have just laid out. Does that make sense?